Hello everyone, I hope you are all well and that you've all had a really great week, and welcome back to my channel. I'm still pretty immobile at the moment, so today I'm being creative and using some of my old photographs of Sheffield Park and Gardens down in Sussex, as I can't walk or sit upright at the moment. And I'll leave a link in the description box below taking you to this beautiful National Trust property. Now, prayer is one of the greatest privileges that we have as Christians, because through prayer we can bring every concern and every burden in our lives to God, and God meets us in prayer. But have you ever wondered why sometimes our prayers don't seem to be answered at all? Almost like our prayers are hitting a brick wall. Now, it is true that God's answer to our prayers might be a no or a wait. And there are some well-known reasons for that, which I will cover in a moment. But there are also other times when God doesn't seem to be answering our prayers at all, and it can feel like he's ignoring us. And that's what I'm talking about today, because God has put that on my heart to share with you all. But first, to the reasons why God might tell us to wait or say no to us. Well, first of all, I believe that God might say no to us if we are not praying in God's will. As Christians, we should always want God's will to be done before our own. It's even right there in the Lord's Prayer, in the line, "Your will be done." And we can try to determine God's will by reading through the Bible and by praying and asking God to guide our desires. And trust that his plans are wiser than our own, because God can see the bigger picture, right? And he knows what's best for us. So God might say no to us if we are not praying in his will. Another reason God might say no to us is if we are praying with the wrong motives. I'll give you a really silly example. If we're praying something like, "Dear God, please make me rich so I can have a better car than my next door neighbour." An exaggerated, daft example of a selfish prayer, but you get the idea. So God might say no to us if we are praying with the wrong motives. God might tell us to wait if there is something unresolved in our lives that we need forgiveness for, and we haven't confessed this to God. And it could be something as simple as someone hurt us years ago and we haven't quite managed to forgive them for it. And that unresolved issue can act like a barrier sometimes between us and God. In the books of Isaiah and Psalms and James in the Bible, it teaches us that clinging on to unconfessed sin can hinder our prayers. God can also tell us to wait because sometimes God's timing is different to ours. God works in ways we can't always see or even comprehend, so he always knows what's the best way forward for us. Or God might make us wait because he has something better or different in mind than the thing we're asking him for. And of course, there is also the possibility that God might indeed be answering us, but because it's not an answer that we're expecting, we don't actually recognise it as an answer. So we can see there that there are many reasons that God might say no to us or might tell us to wait, or his answers to us might go unrecognised. But sometimes it definitely feels like God is silent, not answering us at all. And those other possibilities aside, what could be going on there? Well, I believe that we could be the reason for that. In the Christian Bible, Jesus made something very clear, several times in fact. But one example is in the book of Mark in chapter 11 and verse 24, when Jesus said, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours." Just take a moment to let those words from Jesus sink in. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. That verse seems incredibly simple and clear. Ask, believe, in other words, have faith that it will happen, and it's yours. Wow. Now, although we still have to bear in mind the things I just talked about, like making sure we are praying in God's will, not having selfish motives, not having any unrepented sin in our lives, etc., etc., this is still quite a clear verse. Pray, believe, and receive. Doesn't sound too hard, does it? So why is it then that sometimes God still might not answer us at all? Well, I think that sometimes we get in our own way. Let's think about that for a moment. How often, while praying, are we quietly in our own minds, as they're wandering, as they usually do, thinking to ourselves things like, I know God could answer this, but it really is a big ask, and he's got so many more important things to deal with in this world, and what I'm asking for seems impossible, and I'm really not sure he'll be able to do it. The words of Jesus in that verse I read earlier were very clear and simple. Pray, believe, and receive. Now, we can do that first bit easily enough, can't we? Pray. That's just talking to God, right? That bit is fine. I've got that. But then we get to the believe bit. That isn't always as easy, is it? Will God answer? Won't God answer? Is God too busy? Can God really do that massive thing I'm asking of him? And sometimes while we're still praying, our own doubts might start to sneakily creep in. And we can even start to use all of those reasons I mentioned earlier to almost convince ourselves that God might not answer. And this can be happening before we've even finished praying, before we've even given God a chance to respond to the things that we're asking him to do. Now, I will be honest here and put my hand up and say that I've been guilty of doing this myself in the past. I'm not perfect. But I know I'm not the only one who has done this either, because I've talked about this with many people over the years. So instead of praying with that confidence, that belief and that faith that Jesus encourages us to pray with in the verse I read earlier, we end up praying with doubts, maybe sometimes even assuming that God probably won't or can't do what we've asked of him. Why do we do that? Do we think that way to maybe protect ourselves from disappointment in case God doesn't answer our prayers in the way that we are hoping he will? There is a verse in the Christian Bible in the book of Matthew, chapter 19 and verse 26 that says, with God, all things are possible. So shouldn't we be believing that he can and will answer our prayers without having any of those niggly doubts? Jesus tells us to pray with faith and belief, not because we can somehow manipulate or control the outcome ourselves, but because we should be having faith and completely trusting in the powerful God who created us, right? So rather than praying with niggling doubts about what God will or won't do, we should be coming to God with bold confidence, absolutely believing that he is hearing us and 100% trusting him completely to answer us according to his will. Because that is what faith is. Faith believes that God is able. Doubt believes that God is unable. Faith is trusting that God hears us and that he is more than capable to do what we ask of him. But doubt believes that God might not be able to help us. Faith in God is confidence in God's character. We trust him because we know he is faithful. We know he loves us. We know he keeps his promises. We know he is wise and we know he is powerful. Abraham in the Christian Bible gave us a really good example of trusting God. God promised that Abraham and Sarah would have a son, even though they were far beyond the normal age for having children. It seemed impossible. Yet Abraham chose to trust God's promise, and eventually Isaac was born, proving that nothing is impossible for God, and that Abraham was completely right to not doubt God. The Christian Bible also reminds us in the book of James, chapter 1, in its verses 6 to 7, when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Strong words in the Bible there. But James isn't saying that we will never have questions or moments of doubt, because we all do, right? Because we're all human. But if we're coming to God in prayer and we're asking for his help with something, surely doubting that he will help us is counterproductive. After all, the Bible tells us that we only need faith as small as a mustard seed and we can move mountains. So how can we stop ourselves from becoming a barrier to God answering our prayers? Well, firstly, we can try to make sure that we are praying according to God's will. Keep reading that Bible and keep asking God to guide us. And we can also deal with any unresolved sin issues that there might be in our lives, and that would be a great start. Secondly, we can remember the times that God has already answered our prayers. Looking back at his faithfulness to us gives us courage to trust him again and again. Thirdly, we can spend time reading the Bible. The book of Romans tells us that faith comes from hearing the message of Christ. So as we learn more about God's promises and his faithfulness throughout history, our confidence in him grows. And lastly, we can keep on praying. We can keep on asking. Show God just how much something means to us and how heavy something is on our hearts, even when answers seem delayed. God making us wait doesn't mean he isn't listening. I've said it before in my videos. You've probably heard me say it several times. God's silence is not God's absence. In fact, sometimes he uses that waiting time to strengthen our faith in him and draw us closer to him. Trust me, I'm going through that very thing myself at the moment. So next time you pray, kick those niggly doubts out of your head and pray with complete confidence. Believe wholeheartedly that God is hearing you and that he can absolutely answer every single prayer you offer to him. Why wouldn't he want to help you? He loves you. Remember, pray, believe, and receive. Thank you all so much for joining me again today, and if you enjoy my videos, please give them a thumbs up. And if you could please share one of my videos or even my YouTube channel with your friends and family, that would really help me out. And don't forget to subscribe too if you haven't already. There's still about half of you who watch regularly who aren't subscribed. I sincerely appreciate all of my subscribers and my viewers so much. But until next time, take good care of yourselves and God bless you all. Bye.